This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Nicole Richardson. You're a licensed therapist in Texas, and you've been in practice for over 15 years. And we're going to talk to you about what's the key to, understanding like why your relationship is stuck. That's what we're going to get into a thing like that, and it's something I think a lot of people probably feel that they get stuck in loops. But before we get
Absolutely.
to that, we're going to talk a little bit about something I always ask every guest on the show. A couple of questions before we get to the heart of your story. What motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
Gosh, I never know how to answer that question. When I was a kid, I always wanted to help people. My favorite grandfather, I think most people laugh about this. My favorite grandfather was a judge. And so I grew up thinking that attorneys help people. And so when I was in middle school, I decided I was going to be an attorney. And when I got to college, I realized that that's not necessarily the case. And I read this book by William Glasser called Choice Theory. And I got about halfway through that book and I thought, I want to do this. If everybody knew that they could have this much power in their lives and this much autonomy, people would be so much happier. And so I guess that's it. And now that I'm in it, I love it when people are able to um, make seemingly, sometimes it's bigger than others, but seemingly big or small changes. And they start to have peace and they start to get closer to the life they want. So I think that's what gets me up every day now.
That's cool. I mean, I think it's interesting when people want to do something that's going to help people. It's going to, pay it forward. When you think about, folks who are mentors or therapists or people who listen to other people and try to help them process, not just as like a lot of times in life
Yeah.
you have people like are is there somebody going to help you, or are they going to red mark you? They're going to
Mm,
red mark everything you do, and then it's like you're not really getting constructive criticism.
yeah.
You want somebody that's going to be able to have you look. I always talk about this idea of the looking glass self because I love Victorian poetry.
Yeah.
But when you're doing that self examination, sometimes you might need somebody to help you, so you just don't end up hitting the loop again and getting stuck on resentments and stuck on the past and not being able to go forward.
Well, and stuck on stories that aren't necessarily accurate, right? You and I can watch the same thing and walk away with a radically different impression of it. And so sometimes you do need to like talk something out with somebody else, whether it's a mentor or a therapist or somebody that you trust, right? Talk it out. Like, what is it that's getting you stuck in this loop?
Yeah,
Maybe it's not the thing you think it is.
yeah. 'Cause I think sometimes you don't have good, like when you're an artist, sometimes you're not a good judge of the art
Oh,
you just created.
definitely.
And I've been around a
Yeah.
lot of artists, whether they're a painter or actor, and filmmaker, and they get stuck sometimes. They get tunnel vision, or they're just too close to it, and they don't recognize when they actually hit something good,
Hmm.
and the super self-critical, and it's getting them to actually put it into the world is sometimes very hard because there's like some of
Yes.
their best work is like you have to kind of push them to put it out there because they're so kind of scared of their own
Hmm.
vulnerability.
Hmm.
And there's all the perfection trap and the comparison trap, and they're like, oh, it's not what I was trying to hit. Like it doesn't
Hmm.
matter that you were trying to hit actually hit something else, and it still strikes a chord.
Yeah, but the imposter syndrome is real too, right? Like,
Yeah,
well, it didn't come out the way I thought it would. Well, that doesn't mean it's not cool.
yeah,
Doesn't mean
that's
it's
the
not
big thing.
interesting and thoughtful.
It's like the happy accident. I run to a lot of
Hmm.
people, like
Hmm.
younger people, because I'm a child of the '70s. I run into young people that into the perfection trap, and I guess as a musician, I point this out. Like I'm growing up. I didn't have like a digital tool that could fix the notes on a grid and make it sound
Yeah,
perfect. It's like if I had to get it to sound perfect, I had to play it perfect. I had to go on the tape machine, keep on playing it until I got it right.
yeah,
Or even maybe then I didn't try to get it right. I tried to get the moment. And the problem with being able to keep on going back and fix it, sometimes you tend to wreck it. What I've seen with a lot of people, I've talked to writers,
Too
is like
much.
you
Yeah.
go back and you do the rewrite, you do too many rewrites, and you wreck the whole thing.
It's really easy to overwork a piece of art. And I think that's like part
Yeah,
of what
that's
you're
what I'm
saying,
getting at.
whether it's a
Yeah,
sculpture or a song or whatever. It's very easy to overwork it. And then it can almost sound, especially with music, it can sound mechanical,
yeah,
right?
it gets
Like you
to a
lose the
point where it
feeling.
sounds like anesthetic. And
Yeah.
this is why we try to say, what you learn. You get to go to Berkeley and learn theory, but the whole thing about it is like, it's the soul, it's the heart,
Mm-hmm.
it's that kind of human emotion.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you're a painter, right? Once you put that brushstroke on the canvas, you let it go, and you can't take it back. But on the
Yeah.
digital canvas, you could. Right? And the same thing with like music and stuff. Like once you have these digital canvases, you can suddenly undo it,
Yep.
and that ends up being a rabbit hole.
Oh, so true. But I think you're kind of driving too at this like modern concept of perfection, that perfection exists and or that it's attainable, whether it's in music or in your everyday life or your skincare routine. There's this idea that you can be perfect. And if you can, why aren't you?
Yeah. And I was really scared because my daughter, she's a 25-year-old, and she was showing me some of the stuff that the kids are consuming, and they
Yeah.
had this young man that was talking about like male beauty,
Mm.
and he had these like he was very judgmental. Was like, these are the perfect eyebrows, this is the perfect cheekbone, this is the perfect hairline, and he's got all these followers, and my daughter was like appalled because like he's like body dysmorphism. It's like this
Yeah.
guy is gonna create all these kids that think this, and why is he the arbiter of that?
Yeah.
Who made him the judge of like why? And it's like, is it coming from a certain ethnicity or certain age group or certain religious
Hmm.
background? Like why would you listen to him? Because I was like why would anybody, like, why how who made him the judge? And then you're like what is that?
I think a lot of people want they not that he's right. I feel like even I'm right. I think we're probably on the same page that there's more than one way to be beautiful. But I think too, a lot of people, especially young people, want to know they can, oh, you're going to tell me how to do it right? Well, then I'm going to listen. I might not
Hmm.
agree with you, but at least you're giving me this like definitive, this is right. This is the right way to do it. And I think a lot of people want that. Even if they don't necessarily agree with it, don't we all want someone to tell us how to do it right? Right? On
Yeah.
some level, then I get to opt out, right? If being blonde is the right choice, well then I don't have to make that decision for myself. So if you have decided you're the arbiter and I'm allowed to go with that, then I guess I'm blonde now.
Yeah, that's the thing is like, do you give up your free will? You give up your individual. Because to
Yeah.
me, like being a creative, like I don't want to hear somebody cloning like what's in the top 10. Like I want to
No.
hear what's like in the top 500, like in the bottom 500, the bottom 1,000. Like I go looking for the emerging independent underground artists that I hadn't heard, some new genre that's coming out of Argentina or coming out of Brazil or coming out of Ethiopia or coming out of somewhere in Japan or Korea.
Hmm.
Something different, that like what we call the newfound sound,
Hmm.
like not this known sound. I want to find somebody that's trying something different, and so many people would rather stick with what they know because it's comforting,
It is.
it's safe, and maybe it keeps them in the popularity club.
Well, you also don't get called weird, right? It's scary to be different. It's scary to be the outlier. It's scary to be the one that's like, I've never heard of that. And it's just as scary to be the person who really likes the pop and who's never heard of, I'll just use K-pop as an example, right? You've never heard of it. It's just as scary to say, I've never heard of that. Will you play it
Mhm.
for me? Um, I think you're right. There's a lot of comfort and a lot of safety and kind of being in the middle. There's nothing wrong with it if that's really how you feel, but there's a lot of comfort in that too. And it's easier. It's easier to find. It's easier to find on any platform, in any store, whatever. Not that anybody buys CDs anymore, but the common things are easier to get.
Yeah, but I just wonder if like people's individualism's kind of getting stamped out.
Mm-hmm.
If you're being told at such a young age how to be conform,
Yeah.
and then we talk about individualism, but then we have this kind of dichotomy as like you talk about how you want somebody who's like maybe very creative and they might be neurodivergent, but you don't really support people who are neurodivergent. You don't really want that person to raise their hand. You rather have them not raise their hand, and I'm like, so it's like what? So it's you're getting mixed signals instead of you're wondering like
Absolutely.
what are you supposed to do? And I would think it's like a young person's they're picking up these mixed signals,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, well, which way should I go?
I think that's true. I think there's this idea that, oh, stand out and be different. But like also you're supposed to do it this way. You're supposed to stand out and be different this way. You're yes, be different, be neurodivergent, but like don't be annoying about it, right? Don't make other people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Don't ask anybody to do anything differently. Don't make it weird. Be different our way. So there's still like this pull to like sameness and the middle and the homogeny.
Yeah, and also in terms of like relationships, like people have like very like they have a romantic idealism, right?
Yes.
So like I'm looking for my soulmate. So what does that mean? Is your soulmate going to complete you? So does that mean they're going to solve all your problems?
That's the fantasy.
Right. But the thing is, like, if you come to a relationship and you haven't solved your problems, like you haven't solved imposter syndrome, you haven't solved that you're somebody that's like I always forget the name of it, people pleaser,
Mm-hmm.
and you didn't solve that. You get into the relationship and you're just giving, and suddenly you hit your max, and nobody knows that you hit your max because you've always been a people pleaser.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you kind of act out, and it's like, oh, well, I didn't know you didn't want to do that.
Well, and meanwhile, your partner's completely befuddled because they haven't done anything differently. And yet here they are being fussed at or worse, dumped. And they totally don't understand why. I think, too, there's a lot of pressure or I don't want to say misbelief, because I don't know if that's a word, but there's this idea that happiness is like a sustainable constant, that you can achieve happiness and then you're there.
You're gonna
Yes.
stay there. You're gonna be like in Nirvana. You're gonna hit this zone. And the thing is, like a lot of us, like musicians, we kind of know, like we get into this state, like on stage, right? You're working all day to get on stage.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's 24 hours in a day. You're only on stage maybe 2 or 3 hours. If the rest of your life you hate it, you only like the 3 hours on stage, then you gotta start looking at like what's going on.
Yeah. Well,
Because
relationships
are
are no
in the
different.
3 hours all day.
Right. Well, and so this idea that my life isn't happy unless I have a partner, well, that's so much pressure on the relationship and even on the other person that they can't change. They can't have a bad day. They have to show up consistently or else I'm not happy. I have a lot, like that's a lot of pressure. So this idea that your relationship can make or break your joy, that's a tall order.
Yeah, because you got to find a way to cope, or to me, it's like this idea, like in music. I always bring it back to music. There's this concept like there is no bad note. There's an opportunity. In the example, I'll just kind of give a short example. Like Herbie Hancock, everybody knows him, right? Playing with Miles Davis. He, back in the day, played a wrong chord for a song. He thought Miles was going to kill him. Miles actually changed his notes to match the notes that
Wow.
Herbie played, and kind of evolved the song. It's a concept in modal jazz or fusion jazz that you can be in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
That you have a structure, but you're not wedded to the structure. You can break that structure if the moment means that something in the moment changed, and you can.
Mm-hmm.
You have permission to do it, and it doesn't destroy the song. It kind of could actually make the song better,
Bob
right?
Ross's happy accidents.
Yeah, it's a happy accident, and Herbie said that moment actually changed his life as a composer and musician. That
Wow.
he decided that being in the moment, that he had permission to be in the moment and not be so fearful of it and actually enjoy it. Like because if you're
Yeah.
stressing, how good are you going to be if you're stressed out,
Yeah.
right? But if you get rid of that stress and then you actually replace it with joy and kind of an abandon that's creative abandon,
Mm-hmm.
then you get a lot of positive growth as an artist. You get this like, hey, there's no ceiling. I can keep on. I can just evolve.
It's freedom.
Yeah, it's a total freedom instead of being in a construct and limited. And you can apply that to your life. You can apply
Mm-hmm.
that to all kinds of levels of things in different areas that aren't music. You can look at that and say, hey, you're giving a TED talk and you're reading off a script, but the room is not getting it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you stay on script or do you read the room? Do you actually evolve
Yeah.
the conversation based on what the moment you're in?
That's hard because I feel like when I'm imagining being in a TED talk and giving a TED talk, I've probably spent a lot of time on that. And I totally hear what you're saying. And there's real value in that. And I can imagine standing there going,
Yeah, because people get locked in. I mean, you get
I
locked
spent
into it.
hours on this.
But it's like the comedian
Yeah,
is a really good example. You get the comedian
absolutely.
that's doing that kind of, improv, and the
Mm-hmm.
joke died. Well, if they keep on staying on the dying jokes, they're going to get the tomato. They're going to get, they're going to get hit with an egg.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to bomb. They have a script of things that they have. It's like, okay, I'm going to jump into my script bag. That one didn't work. I'm going to use a different one.
Yeah. Well, even a stand up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stand up is like actors do that. Method actors. The way they perform every night is different. Every scene could be different. Every approach on it is not totally on script because there's like, hey, I'm trying to understand this character.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to understand the feeling, the emotion of the moment,
Why they're making these choices.
why they're doing it, and so it
Mm-hmm.
becomes like this thing where you get this wider, big canvas, but you have a palette, like a painter's palette, and you got all these things. You can mix the colors,
Mm-hmm.
and there's all these ideas of like sound painting, vocal painting, expressive painting, but not really painting. But the idea you're mixing, motions can be thought of as colors,
Absolutely.
and if
Yeah.
you start to mix the colors together, you get blended behaviors. It's like, oh, that gets complex, but it's like, yeah, because that's things aren't black and white.
Well, again,
So
there you're talking about freedom, right? And how many of us feel like we can play like that in our everyday lives? Like doing that in art is beautiful, right? And important. And then how do we do that in our everyday lives? That's really hard, right? We're the best practices, the best way to do this.
yeah, we
How
always got all
often?
these top 10 lists. We're
Yeah.
inundated with
Hacks.
best practices, lessons learned, all these things, and you're like
Mm-hmm.
looking in a book. But then I always when I talk to some executives, the ones that are very successful in like IT, it's like, yeah, you could read all this stuff. It's like, but what do you act on? What do you actually put into place?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can have all this knowledge, but you don't actually do it. You don't actually go and try it. You don't put it in the sandbox and check it out. Like, what does it mean if you don't? Like, you have all this stuff in your book, but it's like it's just in the book. You have to
It's
kind of put it into practice.
You have to put it into practice. I think too, you've got to play though, like get it wrong,
Yeah.
right? This idea, I do think this is something that's kind of floating around and interesting. This idea of like make a practice of failure, which is to me feels very akin to like Make a practice of experimenting. Get
Yeah.
messy with the colors, like, but do it in your life,
Yeah,
not just
failing
in your
forward
art.
instead of failing
Yeah.
backward. You fail because again
Yeah.
there are resentments. You're like, because you're kind of thinking about the past.
Hmm.
You're in a loop. You keep on failing because you're doing the same thing. Versus not failing forward is you're doing different things. It's like the
Yeah.
scientific method. I'm in software design. We have a thing that we call agile methodology, which is incremental design,
Okay.
iterative design. And you'll see it on your cell phone every day. Like your app gets updated overnight, and now it's version 1.215, 1.614, whatever. You look at the version, it actually keeps on incrementing. Because we didn't know that yesterday, but we know that today, so we fixed it.
Hmm.
And we're willing to admit that we made a mistake and we actually evolved the software because something changed and we had to change it.
Something had to. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's never perfect. We know in software design today, it's not stable. Back in the 70s and 80s, it was released and you had to wait 6 months, a year, 2, 3 years for something to happen.
Yeah.
Now we can incrementally change things overnight. So its thing is like in flux all the time.
And how amazing would that be if we could apply that to ourselves?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying. That's when when I
Yeah.
started left brain, right brain,
Hmm.
because I'm into IT and then I'm into music and stuff, and I see the parallel. And when you get into advanced math, it becomes our art.
Yeah.
Advanced math and physics gets theoretical. It's not just yes and no. It's not just 0 and 1. It gets into questions
Maybe
of
that's
like
why I
reality.
hated it.
But it becomes very artistic because I'm into synthesizers, and
Yeah.
my oscillator is running algorithms to create sound waves, and those mathematical algorithms are creating notes, they're creating tones. And when I start to understand what they do, there's a mixture of the science and the math that actually
Interesting.
creates an output as a sound or a rhythm. And you're like, there's a connection between the logic and the art. And sometimes it's like, wow, I don't know if people can piece it together, but that can happen in your life. You could actually start to have
Wow.
some parameters about what you're doing, but then also have the freedom to
Hmm.
know that you could still be expressive
To
and
still
have a
play.
plan and have a plan.
Hmm. I wonder if I would have enjoyed calculus at all if my teacher had ever said, "Hey, this is like art. It's like music. Let's
Well,
get weird."
the thing that kind of did it for some people is like the video game industry. Like when you
Mm.
look behind the calculations that create the movement on the screen, that create the art that's on the screen, to create the fizz, like when your little character bounces off of something. That's a formula
Hmm.
to
Yep.
mimic the friction and the gravity and the physics of the behaviors. So I think if a kid, when they see that on paper and they don't say, what does that mean? But when you actually could show them in a video game, that's why a lot of young kids can actually get into programming because they get to see what it does.
Hmm.
You actually see what that physics calculation does. You see what that calculus calculation does. You see what it actually does on the screen. And when you can actually see what it does, I think then you understand it better. So if you had a teacher that actually, I had a teacher in the 70s that showed me that.
That's
Actually
awesome.
showed me like an asteroids game and the math behind it. And then it made me like, oh, it's not unattainable. It's not unapproachable. I can
Hmm.
understand it like that.
That that is really cool, and I do wish more teachers did that kind of stuff. I didn't get into video games, and I remember our teacher like standing at the front of the car, like doing proofs. This could not have been more boring.
Yeah, it's super boring. If you can't connect it, like you connect it to art, like
Yeah.
polygonal art, and you show what like a polygon geometrical expression can turn into a piece of art. If you start building the polygons on top of each other, you actually can create characters, create paintings. Uh, and I think when you can put it
Yeah.
into something that's artistic, because human beings, I think, are naturally artistic, no matter whether you think you can do it or not. We're everybody can get into the arts, and every day you're into it,
Sure.
but you might not feel that you're good at it, but you do things that are more of an art than a science.
Well, whether you realize it or not, right?
Yeah, like when you talk, there's an art to communication.
Absolutely.
There's
Yeah.
an art when you cook, like how you portray yourself to other people. Just the way you communicate every day, you're creating things. Because like not that you're telling little white lies, but you're inventing your the scene.
Well, it's you're co-creating your reality with the people around you, right? It's not about lying. It's like, how are you showing up today? If you woke
Yeah.
up on the wrong side of the bed, you're going to co-create something different than if you woke up not on the wrong side of the bed.
But you wonder, like, in terms of mental health, there's such a
Mm-hmm.
stigma of
Mm-hmm.
even talking about it. And in another
Yeah.
kind of concrete example, like, and I've had health plans from work, and when you look at that, I'm a diabetic. Like, I don't get limited on how many times I can go get my A1C tested. But if I want to go get mental health counseling, my policy says I can go 10 times a year.
Yep.
It doesn't limit me how many times I can see my diabetic counselor.
Right.
So that right there it seems like that's something structurally wrong.
10 times a year, of course, noting that's less than once a month. So that really is like, hey, you can get help while you're in a crisis, but only during that crisis. And once you start to feel like things aren't as acute, well, we've decided we're not going to help pay for it. I think a lot of people are frustrated with insurance. I can say a lot of clinicians are frustrated with it. I know a lot of people that want to use their insurance are frustrated either because they've got a deductible so high that they basically have to see their therapist twice a week for their insurance to ever kick in. Or in your situation, right? Like, oh, I get 10 sessions a year. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's
I'm
like
really going to get a lot of insight.
how are you actually going to solve anything when a lot of things, it seems like it's this idea that you're going to do it in 10 things. Like
Yes.
that some actuary said, well, 10 visits should be the key. Not that you're actually going to solve the problem.
No.
Which you can't just pin it down to a number in a spreadsheet and say, well, that's the number. I think it's the number.
You can't. And you're right. It was an actuary. There was some group of math nerds got together and said, well, this is in the middle. So that, yes, the bad math. And I think too, a few years ago, I hurt my back really badly and I was in physical therapy. And the doctor I was working with, she made kind of a dark joke about how most people don't do their physical therapy homework. She said, once this stops hurting, people stop. Now, that doesn't mean that the underlying injury, or I hate to use a word weakness, but that's the word I'm going to use, or weakness isn't still there. But if it doesn't hurt, they're not going to keep doing it. And I thought that's so true. And that's definitely true in my business as well. If it's not acute, now this isn't across the board, but on a lot of averages, if somebody's relationship is okay but not great, right? They might not go to therapy. It's got to be on fire. And in fact, research suggests that couples wait 7 years into a crisis before they ever seek therapy.
And what's the likelihood, like, if you're, I am a cancer survivor, so I kind of know, like, if you don't take care of it, you're a level 3, it will go to level 4 and you won't be here.
Yeah.
Right? So if you wait till it gets that bad, I was lucky I actually caught it before it went to like a metastasized to a 4.
Good.
And I'm still here. But I think that happens in all types of health situations.
Absolutely.
And people don't they can understand it with cancer. It's like I can see the cancer cell, I can go run the scan, I can find it.
Yeah.
But then it's like, well, I think you can actually start to see things now, but whether or not they want to admit it. But I mean, I know there are people studying things and maybe are trying to, show the actual behavior within your brain scans and blood and hormone levels and different things, and maybe you could actually start to show things, but maybe they're not buying into it because they don't want to pay for it.
Well, the thing with relationships, right, is it takes two people, right? So one of the problems with waiting 7 years into a crisis is by the time that couple shows up to a therapist, they're probably not both equally invested in the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they are, they're also both really invested in their own hurt, right? So if my story is you've been hurting me 7 years, we'll just use that, right? Then I've got 7 years worth of I'm gonna get you back, or I'm gonna make you pay.
Go away even overnight.
And when I'm in that place, it's hard for me to own my 7 years of nonsense that I've put on you.
Oh, it's
right?
The other. It's the other.
It's
not you.
right. It's really hard to tolerate that I've co-created. Now, obviously, abuse and stuff, I'm not counting that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But assuming that there's no abuse, we're just not in a good place. A lot of people struggle to really take ownership of their part, whatever that is.
Like, the ownership. Yeah, it's a responsibility of, it's like the blame game. Yeah. And it goes back to like the looking glass self. What are you willing to admit about yourself that's maybe not like it's not the rosy picture that you put on?
Right.
Right? That like in the situation, like you have done this and they had did that. And maybe what they did is worse or more intense, but you're not absolved from that. You didn't sit there and do it. You did something, right? And it might not be what they did, but was it positive? Were you doing things together, or are you running on totally different trajectories? Or how are you supposed to be a couple if you're not even in the same space at all? Like you can't compromise at all.
Well, I think too, there's this idea of, I hate this expression, but I'm going to use it because I think it makes sense, right? My dad used to say, like, that ain't the cow I bought.
Oh, no.
But there's this idea that, like, I picked you, and you were this version of this human that I have chosen to be with forever. And so now, let's say 10 years later, right?
You're not the same person.
You're not the same person. But you can't be the same person 10 years later, right?
Yeah, how could you?
Right. I'm not the same person 10 years later. So why should I expect you to be? But that's really, really hard for us. It's hard for us to give ourselves grace. It's hard to give our partner grace. And it's hard to stay curious, right? When we got together, you told me you really liked video games. And now you're not interested in video games. And I'm still interested in video games and you're not. And that's really hard for me to let go of and then embrace this new version of you. And that's okay. But a lot of people struggle with that.
Stuck. Yeah.
They get really stuck.
You get somebody and maybe they were in their younger years, they were on the in the bar scene or they're going to clubs.
Great example.
And then later, like they have no interest in that. They want to go off and do hiking. And you still want to go to the club.
Yeah.
And like, well, they want to go bike, and you want to go to the club. They want to eat healthier. You want to eat the nachos. And it's like, so it's like, you're, and then you say, well, when you were 21, you liked the nachos.
Correct.
But now I like the avocado toast. So it's like you can think, now I'm in a different place. I'm not in the same place. It's like, well, you changed.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, that's like it's so crazy because you get a lot of times. I remember my pop. He's not here anymore, but it was like he said his father used to say like my way or the highway. Grandpa, not my dad, but that kind of mindset he gave that to all his sons. Like my dad did, all the uncles, they had my way or the highway. So it's like that. Well, that's not very compromising.
Nope.
And it's like, well, I'm the king of the castle. It's like, okay, so it's gonna be like Ozzy and Harriet. It's gonna be like Leave It to Beaver. Like that's what it's gonna be. It's gonna be, it's like why does it have to be like that?
Well, I think that's such a great example of for your dad. It sounds like he didn't want to be that way, but he probably didn't know what to do instead. And that's true for most of us. A lot of us grew up in an environment that we think, golly, I never want to live like that. And that's great. That's a healthy thought for a lot of us. But then you become an adult and you're like, well, I don't know what to do instead. And so you end up with these crappy habits that it's just sort of the pendulum swinging in the opposite direction.
Yeah, it's hard because like you
Yeah.
grow up with this everybody knew like mom was really in charge. Pop can say that,
Right.
but as soon as he walks out the door, it's like he's not in charge.
This is my house.
Mom and grandma and aunt, they're in charge, and maybe he thinks he's in charge for the time
Sure.
that he's around. As soon as he walks out the door, it's like it's out the window. Whatever your father said, no, listen to what I told you. So it's like okay, that's how they used to handle it. It's like he thinks he's the king.
Hmm. You reminded me of what is it, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, right? When the aunt says something like, "The man runs the house, but the woman turns the head."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like people found a way to subvert it. It's like
Yes. No, women found a way to subvert it
yeah, that's
as
that's the
best
real
they
thing.
could.
The best they can, yeah.
Yeah.
But he shouldn't have to subvert something. He should be able to like, can't I just do it? Can't I just speak the truth? Can't I just speak my mind without getting dinged for it? Maybe getting pushed
Well,
on. That's why I've always wondered, like, is that's the way we should make it? That's the right way? Versus like, why can't people have their expression heard and felt and understood and realized?
I can tell you why. Like, because it's scary. So, what you're talking about is an egalitarian relationship where two people are equal and their voices get heard and their opinions are aired out. The problem is let's use hopefully a simple example, right? Like, do we buy this highlighter or not, right? There's really only two options, right? Buy it or don't buy it. And if you and I are in a partnership and we don't agree, who's our tiebreaker? And so one of the benefits, and I'm in no way suggesting that egalitarian relationships are not ideal. They are. But having a head of the household means that if he has a slightly bigger vote than me, then we can make progress more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that. I'm not saying it's healthy, but that's why it's preferred, right? You and I can't get to a stalemate on whether or not to buy this dumb highlighter or not
Yeah.
because somebody has a bigger vote. And so a lot of times that's why it's a lot of work. It's a lot of emotional work. And I'm intentionally using a stupid example,
Yeah,
but
you have to actually go through it. And some people
yes,
would maybe like avoidance. They
it's
avoid,
easier to avoid it.
yeah, because like
Yeah.
having the conversation sometimes is like, well, that's stressful.
Yes. So kind of like what we were saying earlier about your daughter finding the arbiter of male beauty, right? He has decided. And so for some people that follow him, he has made their lives easier because they now know what their ideal is and what they're supposed to be striving for instead of having to do their own work. And in a relationship, it can be so vulnerable. Should we have another baby? Should we not? Right? I feel really strongly. You feel really strongly, and in opposite directions. And how do we figure that out? And like parsing that out, that's such a big decision to make. Much bigger than buying the damn highlighter.
Yeah, there ends up being a lot of big discussions. It's like,
Yeah.
like, should we move?
Should we move? Should we buy a house? Should we rent?
Yeah, for your job or for my job?
Right. Well,
You know?
and that's a deal too, right? In the 1950s versions of America, very few women worked outside of the home. Now it's, I don't want to say weird. It's not weird at all for women to stay at home. I have several friends that stay home with their kids, but that's less common now
Yeah,
by
it
a
could
lot.
and it could be flipped that the female out in a household has the VP job
Hmm.
and the husband's the plumber,
Absolutely.
right? Or he's the electrician and she's like vice president, or she's the director, or she's the CEO. And so
Hmm.
then if she says, I gotta go to Europe for 6 months, there's no debate. She's going to Europe for 6 months.
Well, I would love it. I mean, if it's a true egalitarian conversation, it's actually a conversation, right?
Yeah.
But then we also have to have shared priorities because what's our priority? Our relationship? If you have children, where do they fit in that? Is my career more important than my relationship? Like something has to win.
Yeah. And then you wonder, like, sometimes there's all this talk about like male energy.
Mm-hmm.
Zuckerberg is talking about like male energy. It was like,
Oh, I
what the
missed
heck is,
that.
yeah, what is that? He was, so it's like, okay. So I think I was talking to a therapist yesterday, and they had gotten worked up. They had actually been a bodybuilder, and it was a female, and they got 6-pack abs, very muscular. And her husband said, "Well, you're pushing a lot of male energy just because she went that way with her body."
Wow.
And sometimes it's like, and then she said, "Well, no, I'm still a woman." And so is this, well, what is male energy? Is it the fact that you do like a left brain, right brain logic versus creativity, or is that sexist? It's like what are people talking about when they say female energy, male energy? What do they mean, and what kind of conversation are they having?
Okay. So in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of talk about a lot of these concepts. And there was some embracing of the idea that all people had a feminine and a masculine. And for most people, they kind of landed more on one side than the other. And I feel like for some reason, and maybe it was the pull to the middle for everybody to be the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we have forgotten that's normal and healthy, right? Men have estrogen, women have testosterone. We both have those hormones naturally occurring in our bodies. We just have them at different levels. And so this idea that if I'm a woman, I'm all feminine, and if I'm a man, I'm all masculine, I don't think that's true or fair.
Yeah.
We have masculine parts and we have feminine parts, and they are normal and they're healthy and they exist in different ratios in all of us. So when somebody says masculine, I mean, I think we can all conjure up what Zuckerberg probably meant. I'm okay with not hearing his thoughts on what masculinity is, but we can all have thoughts on that. The thing is the way you would define masculinity and the way I would define masculinity might not be the same.
Yeah. Well, I think there's this idea that men got too androgynous. Like,
Okay.
I've heard some people talking about I think the VP said something, but this idea, and I've always felt, just personally, as a creative person, that sometimes like the creative direction you go, there's like this feminine side to myself that
Okay.
I pull from when I'm creating some of my work, my art, and I kind of pull into it because sometimes it's like the more vulnerable side that's less scared of putting out something that's maybe deep or personal or could hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
That the male kind of side says, well, you don't do that, you hide that.
Okay.
Right? That it's somebody that can go to a softer place, or they can go to a more compassionate or maybe understanding place, or like understanding somebody else, and not just prejudging and saying, well, that's empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas sometimes like men are saying, well, suck it up, that's
Right.
weak, that's lame,
My way or the
that's
highway.
they my way to hell. There's no kind of balance to that where you can actually
Okay.
have that kind of feeling, and you see, a guy like a David Bowie and a Prince, and
Mm-hmm.
Freddie Mercury, they can call the feminine. You can see they can call the feminine in their maleness, in their work.
Mm-hmm.
You see it. You see men, they like sing with a falsetto.
Sure.
Like Smokey Robinson, like some of the soul singers in the '60s, they could hit these female ranges, and there was this like what that added to the art,
Yeah.
and it's like there's nothing wrong with that. But there's some mindsets that there is something wrong with that.
Well, I don't know. I guess to me, like, and I think you're kind of pointing to exactly what I was saying with like you and I might have different versions or definitions of what masculinity and femininity are, but I don't really think that's a problem, right? Because what you're pointing to isn't unhealthy. It's just different than what I would say, right? But I also, I guess I get confused a little bit because of late there's been sort of this label avoidance or fear, right? But then all of a sudden, it sounds like people want to call masculine, like this is masculine, this is feminine. Where, the guy you pointed to who said his wife was kind of stepping in more to a masculine space or energy, wouldn't it have been more constructive for him to say, I love you, you're great, I like that you're on this health journey. There are some parts of you that haven't been around as much and I miss those. Instead of needing to call it masculine and almost put her down, or maybe not almost, right?
Yeah, it was a put down kind of, it was
It
really
sounds like it.
negative. It's not that that's beautiful, that you can be assertive or you can show this power,
Yeah.
right? And like some people, it's like, oh, he's femme, and it's a put down, or they're androgynous, and it's a put down, rather than like they're creative and they found this feminine energy within themselves and they've created this art that I wouldn't have imagined that they could do. That they're actually able to voice this piece of themselves, this part of themselves, and it connects to a space I didn't think they were in, or maybe I wasn't in, right? And so then they're like, oh, I can understand that, I can actually, like, I love what David Bowie used to do with like his Ziggy Stardust character. And he got into that, and you can see on stage it's androgynous. You can see that he's calling this feminine within him, but he's still a man. But he's calling this femininity within himself. You saw that with Freddie Mercury. You saw that with Prince. And they could call that, and it was, as an artist, there's a lot of beauty in what they did. And so you could say, like, well, yeah, like, what's wrong with that?
Well, I liked Prince a lot. I was not a Bowie fan. I'm sorry. Never been a huge Bowie fan. But I liked that I think this is part of what you're pointing to. He had this range. But to me, this is a lot like what we were talking about with art, this idea that, like, you can experiment, you can play, you can be outside of the middle, outside of the average, outside of the pop, right? What everybody likes. And what I like about David Bowie is that he was willing to be different, right? I didn't like his music, but I didn't need to, right? Plenty of people did. And so when I think about what is masculine, what is feminine, I don't know. How come I liked this sweater and you liked your sweatshirt? You don't need to like my sweater, right?
Yeah.
I don't need to like your sweatshirt.
Yeah, it's like I don't have to give you permission to wear your sweatshirt.
No.
You don't have to give me permission to wear my sweatshirt.
No, not at all.
And it seems like there are people that want to frame things so they want to control
Yeah.
that aspect, right? And so if you're in a relationship and your partner is saying, like, yeah, you're outside the parameters of what I think's acceptable.
Right.
You're like, okay, where am I going to be with that?
Which I just find really destructive instead of constructive. So if I'm not getting what I want from my relationship, is the solution to tell you that you're doing it wrong? Is the solution to say, I don't find this version of you the most attractive version of you, so I'm going to tell you it's wrong and therefore not feminine enough? Or can I say, like, again, there are versions of you or parts of you that I haven't gotten to be around or enjoy lately. And I miss those parts of you. I miss those expressions of you.
Yeah,
Is
it's
there
like
space for them?
it's like thinking about what you say. It's like a listening. I
Yeah.
think there's like a listening skill because you have to listen to yourself, right? And there's a lot of
Mhm.
people who like tape somebody and actually tape what they say. If
Yeah.
they're always saying they can't do this, or they're not good enough, or they're always being super critical, you actually play it back and they don't actually hear what they say.
Yeah.
And when they actually start to hear what they say, it's like, oh, I'm a downer. Like I'm always on the down. Like
I'm a
I'm
bummer.
always done. I'm always negative.
Yeah.
I'm always critical. I'm never building anybody up. I'm always taking people down.
Mm-hmm.
It's like then it's like, oh, and maybe I was projecting what I do on other people and
What I
saying,
do to myself.
yeah, what I do myself, I'm saying they're doing it to me when I'm the one doing
Right.
it.
Well, I think that's actually one of the biggest, I'm going to use the F word, failures in communication is communication is two parts, right? Or from me is two parts. One is knowing what I need and then being able to say it to you, right? So if I'm not being introspective and mindful and doing my own work, then I'm going to tell you, I'm upset about the socks on the floor, right? Well, I'm sure that's part of it. But what I'm really upset about, if I really got mindful and into myself, what I'm really upset about is when my home, when my space feels messy and cluttered and chaotic, I don't feel okay. And I know that I've expressed this to you before. And when I see your dirty clothes all over the place, it makes me feel like two things. You don't care if I'm comfortable in my space, and you think it's okay for me to pick up after you.
Oh yeah.
But I've got to get really like peaceful with myself, and I've got to have space for me and then do the work of being able to identify that. And then I can come to you and say, this is how I feel in a thoughtful, respectful way. And you can meet that need or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't get clear with myself, I'm never going to express that to you in a constructive way. It's not going
And
to
if you don't
happen.
have clarity with your own
Mm-hmm.
situation, you're not going to be able to actually explain it to anybody else.
Yeah. So if my wife isn't feminine enough for me, I don't I don't even know if she's going to know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
What does that mean to me? Does that mean that she's not hitting on me? Does that mean that I'm feeling emasculated because she can bench more than me? I don't know what that means, right? So if I don't, she probably doesn't either.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people are talking past themselves,
Yeah.
and when you're having a conversation, they're thinking about their next response rather than what the totality of what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Absolutely.
a lot of times, like back in to my software design, if we go into a session, whiteboard session, and we want everybody to participate. We don't want just like 2 people out of 10 people telling us what's going on. So if you get everybody putting all their ideas on the board, it's like when you get all those ideas on the board and you actually can challenge and you don't feel hurt when somebody says your idea is not going to work, because it's not coming from a place of like I
Yeah.
hate your idea. It's like I want to hear it, but it doesn't work for this situation. That doesn't mean you should never talk again. That doesn't
No.
mean you shouldn't
Yeah.
ever speak again. But sometimes people feel like they get set up, and once they say something, if you come down on them so hard, they'll never say it again, because like the response is always like, well, that doesn't make me feel good, so I'm not going to participate in this anymore.
Well, I think there's some truth to that we can be overly sensitive, but I also think the way you shoot my idea down, right, is important. If you say, my idea has merit and it would really fit with this other thing we're going to work on next week, but with this solution, we're going to hit an error with this. But I like where your head's at, and that we can use that next week,
Yeah.
right? That's so much more constructive than dumb idea. are you even trying? Right.
Yeah.
So, that's the other part of the communication is I've got to be willing to really listen to you. Right. And if I really want you to participate in whatever the solution is, right, then I do have to actually listen to your ideas instead of just waiting for you to come up with some sort of magic pill solution that solves it all and makes it easy. That's not usually possible.
Yeah, you have to put everything on the table,
Yeah.
and then let the cards kind of fall, and it be, be fair in
Mm-hmm.
your dealings with with the people you're with. Like if you always want to win, and winning is
Yeah.
you gotta win everything. So no matter, even if their idea is good, you'll still take your bad idea and say it's better, and it's not better,
Yeah.
but you gotta win. So you'll try to push it in. You try to sneak it in, and then how are you ever gonna have any kind of partnership if you always have to win?
Absolutely. I worked with somebody once who said, when I win an argument, my marriage loses. And I thought that was so beautiful and so true. And that's so true in just about every relationship, right? When you get focused on winning, the relationship loses.
And I think that's where some people think is, oh, I got to be a winner. And I think
Cool.
that's like the overall plan. Like they got to win every situation. Where like the softer
Yeah.
skill is to like sometimes it's actually not gonna win the game by you winning this piece of the act, right?
Right.
Like of the whole part of the you know situation. That you don't have to win every round. If you're gonna think of it in rounds,
Right.
maybe you shouldn't be thinking of it in terms of like a sports match. Maybe you should be thinking of it in terms of like this is something like is our life, and you're bringing it down to like second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter.
Yeah.
I gotta get that touchdown.
Well, so whether we're thinking about people we work with or romantic relationships or even with our kids, right? This idea that I have to win is tantamount to I'm going to be right every time. So imagine with a 2-year-old. The 2-year-old, I don't know, they throw a fit, right? You take them to the grocery store, they lose their minds because they want cookies, right? If you get the kid to be quiet, right? You get stern, you get mean, you get scary. That kid could learn, I have to behave a certain way in this space or I'm not safe.
Mm.
So you won, you got your way, the kid got quiet, kid stopped asking for cookies, and you've terrified that child.
You gotta build something that's gonna kind of
Right.
cascade through their life and not be what you want for them.
Instead of teaching the kid the life skill of not losing their mind every time they want something, they're two, they don't know how to do that. And in a relationship, a more egalitarian relationship, whether that's a coworker or even somebody that works for you or your partner, if you win, what precedent does that set? You're telling the other person, I am always right, therefore I am perfect, and don't even try to talk to me about your needs and your opposing view because I don't care. I'm going to win.
Yeah, it's different
Cool.
compared to like collaborative efforts. You
Yeah,
know,
but there's
colla-
no collaboration.
yeah, collaborate because sometimes you get into a situation like if you're in a band, you have a top-down head
Yeah.
writer, and he writes like everything, and then you
Mm-hmm.
try to challenge it, then it's like it doesn't like it, or you have a like like give an example, REM, they all get 25, 25, 25, 25. Everybody in the band got the equal writing credit.
That's awesome.
So that's a very unique idea in music. There's a lot of bands, I think U2 does that too. But most bands don't do that. They have like 80, 20, 60, 40. They would do that. They would like, there was
Wow.
people who were like the top down approach. You know, they like the two head writers like Beatles, Lennon, McCartney. They get most of it. Harrison
Wow.
and Ringo get some of it. Um, to me, when you have the more egalitarian approach, then there's a lot of colors to what you're doing, and you get a wider perspective. You listen to the
Mm-hmm.
work. It seems more wide ranging. There's a lot of different colors. There's a lot of different aspects to it because now all just two guys doing it. They're all doing it, and then they feel that comfortable giving up their, well, not giving up, but letting their ideas be heard.
Right.
So then you get the different perspectives.
You get more agency,
Yeah,
right?
and when you have more perspectives, you get more. There's more out in the world than instead of less.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think if you bring it down to a
Yeah.
microcosm level, then you're probably gonna have a better time in your relationship.
At that point, why not just have two people in the band and then you hire out the other
Yeah, guys like,
musicians?
yeah, you'd have work for hire.
Yeah.
Well, some bands actually will end up like the Eagles was kind of known as a work for hire band.
Okay.
Because that's what they kind of set up. But yeah, it's like that sometimes. And then when they have that, what happens? Band breaks up.
Yeah. Well, and it's not really a band, right? Like, I mean, you know more about music than I do, but when I think about Simon and Garfunkel, right? Like, I don't know what their split was, but to me, they were the band, and I'm sure they had. I know they
Yeah,
had other
I'd been around, but
musicians,
you
right?
didn't know who they were. You may, if you're real detailed, you know who they were, but
I,
like not a lot. Most people just think it's them.
oh, I see. Well, yeah, I did. I just thought it was them.
Yeah, they had other guys, or they had drummers, they had other players, but like, yeah, they were top built.
Yeah.
And they were the two writers, and then they kind of ran into each other because like one of them was writing more than the other, or one's getting more attention, and it causes breakups because it's ego. Ego plays in. It's like who's getting the top bill, who's not getting the
Yeah.
top bill, and I think in the relationships, like who is actually running the show, and do you who needs to be? Do you really need to be running the show? Like why do you have to run the show?
Well, I think that kind of comes back to like, what's the priority? Am I the priority? Is my career the priority? Is my ego the priority? Or is this relationship the priority? Right?
Yeah, is it a
Is
friendship or is it a partnership? Is it
Yeah,
a business or is it you?
something's got to win, which means something else is going to lose.
Yeah, there's a lot of different aspects to it,
Mm-hmm.
and we
Mm-hmm.
already hit like the hour, so we kind of hit our mark.
We
But
did.
yeah, it's just like human beings are very complex,
Very.
and sometimes we want to simplify it. And I think this is where
Yeah.
people, when they start to understand that all the facets of your personality, all the pieces that make you you, there's a lot of foundational elements, and you can't just have like one pillar paid attention to and then think the rest of them are going to
Right.
be all right. So then you want to talk to someone like yourself. So if you have your website, NicoleRichardson.com, so if people connect with you there, what can happen there?
NicoleMRichardson.com. Sorry.
Okay, that
But
remembers.
subtle but important difference.
Yeah.
Totally different site. Yeah, you can find me there. I've got a blog. You can sign up for my newsletter. And if you're in Texas, you are interested in individual or couples counseling, you can absolutely reach out to me there, and we can get something going.
That will be fully clickable, so you won't have to remember about typing it out.
Yeah.
So within the podcast platform, we were on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. That URL is clickable in the podcast description, and we will be on all the other podcast platforms where you can listen to or watch a podcast by tomorrow. And the same thing will apply. You'll be able to click through that URL, and we will provide a landing page later to your audience that you can share, where they can just pick whatever platform they want to watch it on or listen to
Cool.
it on. So thank you very much for being on the show
Thank
today.
you. It was great to meet you.
Thank you. Have a great night. Have a good
Thanks, you
weekend.
too. Thanks, you too.